Indiana University revealed Tuesday that records for 146,000 students and recent graduates had been compromised. Students from across the state from all 7 IU campuses were affected. Josh and Lynn reports on the nature of the breach and some of the challenges in keeping data secure.
The names, addresses, and social security numbers of 146,000 IU students and graduates were left in a publicly accessible, non-password protected online folder since early 2013. On Tuesday, IU officials reported the breach to the state attorney general's office.
I'm actually very shocked that the information has been out there this long. I think that's way too long.
I do trust IU to kind of be careful with with my information, but yeah, all my internet access is over IU's network.
As they say, the biggest breach of security anywhere is not really the computers themselves, it's the human beings.
Naturally, with the incident comes comparisons. Target's high-profile data breach in December affected millions of customers and had a significant impact on the retail giant's business. Target confirmed profits fell 40% after the announcement. Fortunately for IU, there are more differences than similarities to the Target breach. Here's a big one. Hackers intentionally set out to obtain information from Target's servers. At IU, Associate Vice President for Public Safety Mark Bruin says no humans saw the student files. Instead, automated programs called web crawlers access the data.
Well, as these automated programs go from sort of server to server, computer to computer, network to network, they're looking for things that, I guess, based on some criteria that the company has set, would be interesting to people who do the searches. And so it's looking across for files, it's looking for web pages, it's looking for all manner of things, and it does that on every internet address that it finds.
IU staff found web crawlers for 3 companies: Google, Baidu, the Chinese equivalent to Google, and a third company that had already gone out of business.
At some point, these files had, the folder that these files were in, or the files had passwords on them. And so when a web crawler hits those, it tries to access the files, it, is asked for a password, and certainly the web crawler doesn't know what the password is, and so it drops it and goes on. In this case, the password at some point had been dropped. And so the web crawlers had access to it. The web crawlers were not asked for the password at that point, and so then they were able to access the files and cache those.
IU officials are blaming simple human error for the security breach, not a software or hardware glitch. Software security consultant Karthik Ganesh says data breaches are fairly common. There was one just last week at the University of Maryland that affected more than 300,000 faculty, staff, and students.
The organization do their best to identify these vulnerabilities earlier and try to mitigate them. But even more sophisticated softwares gets affected. So the practice is to kind of stay up to date and keep looking for security vulnerabilities and try to fix them as soon as possible.
Ganesh says this incident could have been avoided if IU had conducted security testing periodically.
Data needs to be handled securely. And especially if it's a social security number and other sensitive details, those details have to be stored securely, and there should be proper authentication and authorization controls in place. And those pages shouldn't be allowed to cache on the browsers.
IU staff have since moved the records to a secure location where it can't be accessed without credentials. They've also submitted requests to Google and Baidu to remove the information from their databases.
We're definitely doing a thorough investigation on what we can do different in the future, and looking at different options just to really make sure that we don't have any other issues with this student information.
In the meantime, Indiana University has set up a call center and a frequently asked questions page for students concerned about their records.
I know IU will handle it. I do trust that, but I do think it is a serious concern, and I think it's going to have to be dealt with a lot of resources.
The director of the IU Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research, Fred Kate, is here to give us some more insights into this story. First, though, we want to mention that the Center for Applied Cybersecurity Research is a sponsor of this program. Fred, we heard there, Kennedy, at the end of that piece say that the university is looking for what they can do to try to not keep this from happening again. What are some of the general guidelines of a university as big as IU to keep data safe, and who enforces that?
Right, so it's a big challenge because remember, a university is not only big, but it's also very diverse. And so every department, every school operates data. What we try to do is ensure that data that would be sensitive, that would include student data, anything with the student grades or social security numbers, things like that are kept not only in password protected files, but are also kept behind firewalls. So they're not even really visible from the internet unless you come in with very specific authentication credentials. We've been incredibly successful at that. I use one of the leaders in doing that. And so you have to have the protections, you have to train your personnel in how to use them, you have to have oversight so that you catch things when they do go wrong, inevitably sometimes they will, and so that you mitigate any damage if damage occurs.
Is part of this staying ahead of the hackers?
It's very important to stay ahead, but remember, this wasn't a hack. So this is an example of just a human error leaves data exposed. In many ways, you could say it was a fairly fortunate incident, and that there was no human access to the data. Guarding against hackers is much harder because, of course, hackers are actually going to try to exploit any vulnerability they can find, take advantage of any weakness, and very often that is a human weakness, get someone to provide their password.
Now, I assume there's a cost that is associated with this too.
There is a cost. First of all, cybersecurity is not cheap because it's a 24/7, 365-day undertaking. So there's a real cost in that, and there's also a cost in the training and the monitoring and the oversight and so forth. The other thing is cybersecurity can also impede your access to data that you really need to do your job. And so the challenge is how to not let it get so much in the way that you actually can't do your job. On the other hand, you don't want the data to be insecure.
We keep talking about the big corporations, but what about small businesses? Are they able to keep up with cybersecurity?
I think the answer is no, and the good news is that a lot of the attacks are against large players. So large players invest more, they're more obvious attacks, they have more data. But if you think about, for example, 15 million app developers around the world, typically these are 2 or 3 person operations, even though they may be getting very sensitive information from your iPhone or from your Android. These are the types of places we actually really worry about cybersecurity.
We have this email that was sent to students this morning regarding this big IU breach. Was wondering, some of the students not too happy. What's your take on how the university handled this situation?
I actually think the university response has been quite credible. In other words, first of all, it's not an attack, it's not a breach. No data was handed over to a human, no data was exfiltrated by somebody coming in to steal data. Rather, it was an accidental and unfortunate and wrong exposure of data. To our knowledge, there was no human access to the data. I think the university has jumped on it very quickly and has tried to respond very aggressively. But to be honest, the real test is going to be not just the response to this incident, but the steps taken to make sure that these types of incidents are not repeated in the future, that students have confidence that their data is protected.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that insight. Appreciate it.
Pleasure to be